Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sew Your Bag. Today, we're going to be going over part two of making the Ireti Saddlebag. So, the pattern can be found on my website at www.sewyourbag.com, and it was part of the subscription box for March. The subscription box contains all the material that you need to make this bag. In part one, we reviewed the prepping of the bag. So we talked about interfacing. We talked about how to cut the fabric, how to cut it in a way where the pattern is continuous. So we talked about a lot of different things in that lesson. So if you didn't see lesson one, you can go back to lesson one and watch it from the beginning. Today, we will be going through how to construct the exterior of the bag. So before we get started, let's review exactly what you're going to need for the exterior of the bag. All right. So there was some homework from last night or from day one, and that was to complete all of the interfacing. So we should have three pieces: the front, the back, our flap. In addition to that, we should have our side gusset piece. So we have two side gusset pieces. So these are the side. And then there's a bottom accent piece, which we will add to the bottom of the bag. The next thing that we should have, or a couple of things we should have, is we should have a couple of these accent pieces, which will go down the side of the gusset. And that's one of the things we'll do first. And then the other thing for today that we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at our straps. So we should have a main strap, and then we should have another piece of a strap, which is smaller. And this piece is actually, I believe in the pattern, referred to as the hinge strap. So it's a smaller piece of the strap. I'm actually looking for the bag, so I put it away. But I'm going to find it so that we can all talk about that. Some other tools that you'll need today are in the kit. There was in this box that came, there was a little kit. And the kit will contain the zipper that we used. There was there is some paper tape, which can be used to hold down our accent pieces. There's a buckle closure, which goes to the front. So we will be using that today, or at least a piece of it. There are some hinge connectors. There's a slider. We'll be using that as well. There was a strap end. And then there was a little screwdriver. So we're going to put away our zipper because we won't need that until tomorrow when we do the lining. But we'll keep out everything else. So let's put that to the side. Okay. So let's take a look at how we're going to construct this. So the first thing we're going to need to do is on the actual side accent pieces, and give me 1 second to find the bag. It's easier to talk about it if you can actually see it. Okay. It's being very elusive today. We'll just continue on. If I spot it while I'm talking, then I will bring it up. And I think I found it. Okay. So this is the bag. And so what we're going to be constructing right now is this piece here, the side gusset, putting the bottom and the other side. So we're going to be creating this whole round piece on the bottom. So this piece right here along around the bottom outside of the bag. We'll also be installing this piece, and we will be leaving this piece until the end. So we won't be installing that other part of the lock until the end. So the first thing we're going to need to do before we start is we're going to need to make a mark at the bottom. And the mark that we're making is in the direction, but we're going to make that mark because what we want to do when we're putting this together with the bag is that we want to make sure that the bag is actually lining up on the corners. So I'm just going to make a mark. And on the bottom, I'm going to make, okay. So I've made 2 marks on the bottom. I just need it along the edges just so that I know where it is. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our side gusset pieces and we're going to take one of our accent pieces. So the accent pieces we used yesterday, and I showed you how to do it. It should measure 1 inch. Mine actually came apart. I'm using double-sided tape to hold it in place. Okay. And what we can do is you can either lay this piece straight down the middle using your paper tape. So you can grab your paper tape if you have it, and I'll show you how this works. I'm going to end up using double-sided tape, but paper tape is really nice because you can sew right over it and then peel it off later, and it doesn't damage your material in any way. So you can take the paper tape, it rips very easy, and it'll hold it in place. So we can use this, sew down the sides, and then it will hold it in place. And we don't need any pins or clips. So in the kit, I gave you that. It was actually recommended or suggested as something that is used by one of our subscribers. And so I thought it would be a good idea to include it in the kit itself. Okay. So I'll use double-sided tape to hold mine in place, but you can use this paper tape, which is very helpful. So I'll leave this on so you can see how it comes off later. So just want to make sure that this is in the center, and my gusset is a little bit too long or too short. It's not an issue. I'm just going to do a quick remeasure here because I don't think I cut my gusset pieces the right length. So it won't fit to the end. Okay. So I'm going to recut my gusset pieces and then refold them. I don't know why, but they're shorter than they should be. So let's do a quick recut of these and then refold them, and then we'll get started. So, and they weren't slightly short, they were very, very short, which is why I'm recutting them. Hey, Whitney. Good afternoon. Thanks for stopping in. I don't know who Facebook user is, but thanks for stopping in for a short bit. I know that it's probably, for me, it's 2 o'clock here. I'm on the East Coast, and I know it's early in the morning, but I thought people would get to rewatch it later today. And then tomorrow evenings will be at 6 o'clock. So I'm just recutting my accent strips. For some reason, I cut them very short. I don't know why or how I did that, but they were too short by about almost a ½ inch. And that's never going to work. So I'm just recutting them And all we did was go over the pieces that we're going to need today for the exterior. The hardware that we're going to need is going to be our lock. So we're going to install the first piece of our lock, and then we'll install the, um, we'll go through the straps and we'll install that hardware as well today, for the exterior so that we're all ready. So I'm just going to prep my straps. And I know that they're long, but I'm gonna let's cut this shorter. I am measuring this off camera, so don't think that you're missing anything. It's easier for me to measure off camera than on camera, so I'm just gonna measure them and cut them. And I will make them a little bit longer this time, so I know that I cut them correctly. So I'm just adding some double-sided tape to this, and then I'll just fold it to the middle. So for those of you who haven't seen yesterday's video, part one, all I'm doing is adding double-sided tape to the accent pieces. And then what I'll do is I'll peel it off and I'll fold it to the middle. You should mark your center line. I'm not going to do that again because I did it in part one, but I will just make sure that I have this. Okay, so hopefully this time around I'm going to get it right, the right length. So I'm just going to fold this in, and I'm eyeballing it. When I'm done, it'll be exactly, because I'm just going to line up that edge with the other edge. So, and this is waterproof canvas. If you decide that you want to do this accent piece on a different bag and you use cotton, I highly recommend that you interface it, the cotton, just to give it stability. If you don't interface the cotton, what will happen is when you go to sewing, you could have pulling and puckering. But if you interface, it'll help to make it smoother. Sorry, and that's because there'll be drag on your presser foot on your material. So by interfacing it, it will eliminate that drag. So I took my gusset piece, I lined this up to the center, just like that. And then, like I mentioned, you can use the paper tape if you got the subscription box, and you can use that paper tape to hold this down, which means you will not need pins. So I'll do one with paper tape, and then I'll do the other one with double-sided tape. So either will work well. And what's nice about the paper tape, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, is that you can sew through it. So I can actually just sew through this and add as much as you think that you need to hold it down. So I'm just going to add another piece up here just to make sure it doesn't go off center. And then on the next one, I'll just use double-sided tape so you can see the difference. Hey, Jillian. Oh yeah. I have another ruler that has that 1/2 inch, and I always cut at least one piece wrong because I don't account for that 1/2 inch. So I really try not to use that ruler for that very reason. It's perfect when you need to cut a 1/2 inch because it's very obvious, but it does it's like I think a 4.5 inch ruler or something, and I'm used to the whole numbers, so that happens to me too. How are the winds by you, Jillian? I think I was reading you had posted that you had like high winds out by you. I think yesterday it was. Okay, so that's the second one. And then this one, I'll just use double-sided tape. So for the double-sided tape, all I do is I run a piece straight down the middle here, and then I peel it back and I stick it on. So that's another way you can do it. If you have glue, some people have the Beacons glue, you can actually put little dots And I would recommend little dots only because you don't want glue everywhere, and it serves, it serves the purpose of just keeping it temporarily where it needs to be. So now what I'll do is I'll lay this in the center, and I'm just lining it up along the bottom, and I'm pressing in place. So one has double-sided tape and the other one has the paper tape. I'll show you the difference. Both work equally as well. I guess you can check the price of it because maybe the double-sided tape will be less expensive than the paper or vice versa. What I will say to you is it's probably good to have both in your arsenal um, of sewing if you can. Double-sided tape, I mean, the paper tape you can pick up very easily at any of the uh, like CVS or Walgreens or any of those places. Probably Walmart even has it as well in the pharmacy section. So today you'll find, oh, I didn't realize you had fires too. Mother Nature is just a little chaotic lately. Sorry to hear that. I don't know if the fires come with smoke, but I know in California you have the smoke situation also that whenever there's a fire, you have to deal with the smoke. So we're going to take both of these to our sewing. We're going to take both of them to the sewing board, the sewing machine, and we're going to get them, we're going to sew these down. I'm going to be using over here, I'm going to be using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along both of the sides. So for those of you who are not comfortable with sewing 1/8 of an inch, I would recommend that you use um, a quarter of an inch. And then if you use that quarter of an inch seam allowance, so if you use a quarter of an inch, that's totally fine because we fold tuck the ends under. But if you're not comfortable, but if you are comfortable, then just sew. And I'm just doing one row of stitches at 1/8 of an inch. My stitch length is going to be between a 4 and a 5, and that's because it's going to be a top stitch. And I did change my thread, so it should be a nice purple color thread. So let's go to the sewing machine and take a look. So I will start with the one with the paper tape first so that you can see how that looks. It's so thin. It's like wafer thin. So it's perfect for sewing through. And, it doesn't have like a gummy residue or anything like that. So it's perfect for that. So remember to turn your stitch length to a 4, between a 4 or 5. If you don't know which one looks better, over time, one time, try a 4. Next time you do a project, try a 4.5. And then whichever one you like, that then becomes your top stitch. So and I do back tack at the bottom only because I want to make sure that it doesn't come undone as I'm, working with it and manipulating it. I'm then going to go across to the other side. So I did not break my thread. I just went straight across because I have to sew up the other side. But you can see how nicely it stitches over that paper tape. And then I'm going to go back up the other side at the same 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And so I've sewn through it. When I'm ready to, I can just simply peel this off. So I'm just peeling it off here. and it rips at the seam. So just hold it and it'll rip at that seam. I don't know if you can see it where the threads are. It just rips very nicely there. And then what happens is then you could just peel out the middle piece here, and it's all done. So that's really nice about the paper tape. So I just hold it and I rip, sort of like it's perforated paper. I rip to the side. I don't rip straight up, but I rip to the side like it was perforated paper, and it pulls right off. It is sticky. It may not seem like it's very sticky, but it is sticky. And then we'll just peel this. And I may have mushed this down a little bit too much, so let's just lift it up. I'm just going to lift it up here, just like that, and then just need to get under it. And we just have a couple more pieces, so we'll just take these pieces off. It doesn't leave any residue or anything on your project. There's no sticky residue or anything. So a shout out to Nancy Scalone, who's the one who mentioned this. Mentioned using paper tape. So for those of you who have already used it and knew the secret, I'm grateful when you guys share what you know with me so I can share it with others. So that one came off. Maybe a little bit more work than using double-sided tape, but I actually really like this, and I'll probably be using it some more. So this is the one with the double-sided tape on it, and I'm going to do this one as well the same way. I am using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And when I sew this, I hold, and I didn't mention this, but the inside here is where 1/8 of an inch is for me. The outside of my presser foot is 1/4, and the inside is 1/8. You just measure from the needle to that position. Most domestic sewing machines, the initial foot that comes with your sewing machine, they are, the same width. So if you measure yours, it'll probably be the same 1/4 on the outside and 1/8 on the inside. The inside 1/8 is not where the needle is. It's actually where the edge of the presser foot is on the inside. So that's the 1/8. When I sew it, I gently hold this and I let the machine do the work, but I position my hands in such a way that because they're stable, it glides through. And if I just slightly shift, this is exaggerated, but if I just shift slightly in one direction or another, I can always get it on track. Also, another key about top stitching is to just continue. Even go at a slow pace. Even if you go off, don't stop. Just keep going and gently push your piece back. So I'm going to stitch. So if I'm going at this pace and I would have go off by a little bit like that, just go back in and shift it. You can shift it. Just don't let the machine do the work. Hold it gently. It's sliding through my fingers, and you should be able to get a nice even stitch. And I'm not going to stop. So I really try not to stop when doing top stitching because it really helps to give you a straight line. Okay. So now this one, because I use double-sided tape, there's nothing to peel off, but you can see that I've done the 1/8 inch. Like I mentioned, if you're not comfortable with top stitching, use the 1/4 stitch. It will be totally fine. What'll happen is that at this end, it may get a little bit raised up on the outside, but it's not going to be anything that's going to impact the using of your bag. And just to mention also, the accent piece was added after I put the foam and after I interfaced the interface over the foam with my woven interface. So this was in part 1. So everything should be interfaced. All foam that was needed should also be added, and that was in part 1. So on my corners, when I don't get a 45-degree angle. Okay. Okay, so Whitney asks, is the paper, I'm reading the comments. Whitney asks, does the paper tape work better for some materials than the double-sided tape? And the thing is, it probably works better, and I haven't tried it. It probably works better with anything that is a fabric, right? So it probably works better with anything that's like this. In this case, I have canvas, which is a fabric, and this is fabric. I have not tried it on vinyl or cork, but if I had to guess, I would say it works equally as well with cork, because there's usually some texture, and it's, on it. If you're using a smooth vinyl, it's probably a little bit more difficult, not necessarily in using it, but maybe in peeling it away. So if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that would be what I would say. So it always seems to hate. So you said it hates the double side tape. So let's take a look at something. Okay. So this is waterproof canvas. And I just want to get back to your comment. So this is waterproof canvas. And I don't know if it's the type of tape, really. I'm going to stick this on here. And what I'm doing is I'm pressing it in. So it does stay. I will also do this and this. So I'm just creating, folding it in and making a seam. And I will take a piece of double-sided tape and I will try to seam them together. So I'm just going to rip this off. So I stuck that on. I'm going to stick this to the middle, and I'm going to try to stick it to this itself. So I would say if you're sticking fabric to fabric on the waterproof canvas, you should not have a problem. Like I said, it's got a woven. Hey, Yana. So it sticks together. If you're sticking the shiny part of it, so in other words, if you're trying to stick this part on it, it may not stick as well. And that's because it's too smooth, right? So if you think about it, paper tape is usually used a lot in, like, for medical purposes. And your skin has some texture, right? There's pores, there's hairs, there's things, and it grips on. But if you use it on the fabric, it should stick. That's why I said vinyl may not work as well or stick as well. I have not tried it, so it's probably something I'll have to try. But it is sticking, pretty well, fabric to fabric. So I hope that helps. Okay. When it comes to double-sided tape, it doesn't always stick. So I don't know if you notice, and this was double-sided tape, and there's a sticky side here, and then there's a part here which is sort of like a paper, and you peel that back, which also then exposes the other part of it. When it comes to double-sided tape, honestly, they're all different. You have to find one that works for you. I know there are people who use like a leather tape. I don't personally use a leather tape because I think I know it gums up my needle, and then it pulls my thread, and my top stitching doesn't come out as nice. The thing about double-sided tape, which I will say to you, is I have found when I use it on waterproof canvas, because when I was folding the pieces like this, it may stick initially. Then you sort of have to run to the sewing machine and sew. So I will clip this. If I'm not sewing it right away, I will add clips because it will tend to lift up on the ends. And this is my piece that was shorter, right? I put this yesterday. I went through and I showed everybody and I did this. But over time, this does lift up. So if you're not running right to the machine, it will lift up, and you may have to put clips in it to hold it if you plan to come back to it. But it's easy enough to fold back. And this does definitely work better on fabric, the double-sided tape, at least the one that I'm using because it's a low tack. Works better on double-sided fabric than it works on waterproof canvas, and that's because the back is smooth. So those are the two. Those are, my opinion. It's definitely something you're going to have to try yourself, and it's trial and error. And like I said, I wouldn't run out necessarily and buy everything, which is one of the reasons that I give the subscribers everything they need, which gives them an opportunity to try something and see if they like it first before they go out and buy it and add it to their sewing repertoire. Yes. So I think that's still Jillian. She said, so smart to cut it a little longer. I did cut this a little longer. I did it because the other one I cut short, and I was like, okay, I don't want to end up in the same spot. And then this one says, can you help me understand what happens with my 45 at the 45-degree angle when I don't get a 40? Okay. So when you get to the corners, and this is easier to show you on this one because I did it here. When you get down here, I believe is where you're, and correct me if I got this wrong. When you top stitch, you get to the corner, and then you turn the corner, right? So you get to the corner here, you leave the needle down, and then you pivot, and then you start sewing this way. What can happen from time to time is when you get to the corner and the needle's down, when you bring the needle back up, instead of the line being straight here, and I hope you can all see it, instead of the line being straight here, and then you're getting a nice 45-degree angle, what happens is your thread will go from the previous hole and you'll start stitching here. So you'll end up with a thread that looks like this. What you want to do is when you're pivoting at the corner, you want to make sure that before you lift your needle up and you turn it, your needle has to be fully in the down position, and it should be on the upturn when you're rotating it. So in other words, if I stitch this way and I say leave your needle in the down position, it should be fully down. You can use your hand, your wheel, crank it until you see the needle start to go up. And at that point is when you're going to lift your presser foot and rotate. Because by doing that, you're guaranteed that it caught the thread on the back. If you just stitch there and stop, and then you lift and rotate, it's still on the down position and it may not have caught that stitch. So you want to make sure that the needle is going back in the up position. So hand cranking it down, then rotating it, keep it rotating until you see the needle actually start to move in the up position. Don't take it out of the fabric, lift your presser foot and then rotate it and start stitching again. So that should help you with that corner. I hope that helps. I hope I got your, I hope I answered that question. I hope I understood your question right. Okay. All right. So now that we've done this, and now that we've done these two pieces, this piece was actually the bottom accent piece here. And remember this piece, when we sewed it, we actually sewed the foam to the edge because it's waterproof canvas and I can't iron it like I did these other two pieces. So what I want to do is flip my pieces over, and I want to make sure those two lines that I drew on either side are at the bottom. So once they're at the bottom, I'm going to put one of my pieces to the side. I'm going to flip this over, and my marks are on the bottom, and I'm going to take my piece with my waterproof canvas accent piece, and I'm going to put it wrong side up or right side down. So these are right sides together. And I'm going to clip these two in place. I want to make sure that I'm matching the ends over here when I do this. So I'm going to clip them in place. And Yana says, so glad to see you, Yana. I always have a lip balm next to my machine, and when the needle gets sticky after sewing over double-sided tape, you apply lip balm over the needle and wrap it with a piece of paper towel. That's a great idea. That's a great idea, Yana. I know some people say that they clean the needle using a little bit of machine oil, but the lip balm is the same, right? It's a petroleum based, usually, or beeswax product, and so that helps a lot. That's a great idea. See, now I have to go out and buy lip balm. I won't buy the expensive kind. I'll buy a little less expensive, but this it'll get the same result, hopefully. And Yana says a needle positioner is a game changer. It always stops with the needle down and the corners are perfect. So one thing I will mention, and that's true, it stops with it down, but it doesn't automatically guarantee that it's on an up position. So that's something you want to double check. The other thing is to um, the the positioner works on industrial or semi-industrial machines, and for domestic machines, I have not seen one. There may be one out there. I have not seen the needle positioner, but it is definitely a good add-on. I did add it on to my industrial machine, and Yana, you're absolutely right. It is a game changer. Okay, so now that I've clipped those that together, I am going to sew this together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to come back. We're going to need to change our stitch length down to 3. So it was on 4 because we did the top stitching. Let's change it down to 3. And I'm putting the woven interface side down, so the smoothest side down. I mentioned to you before that I try not to sew with the foam side down if I can help it, because it grabs the feed dogs and there's a little bit of drag. So I will back stitch at the start and the stop of this, but I will stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to go forward and then back a couple of stitches and then forward. Once again, my 1/4 inch is the edge of my precipice. So once it's attached, it should look like this. Okay. So we need to do the same thing for the other side. So we're going to lay this once again face up. We're going to take our other piece face up. Make sure that those marks are at the bottom. Flip it over. We're going to take the piece that we completed, but we want to get that bottom accent piece. And we're going to lay this right sides together, lining up this bottom piece right here. And we will clip them in place. Now, when I add my clips, the reason you saw me hesitate a little bit, when I add my clips, what I do is I make sure that the flat part, so a clip has this curved piece, but if you turn it over, there is a flat piece. You want that flat piece that's here to be flat against the machine. So I try to make sure the curved piece is on top. So since I'm sewing with the foam on top, I'm making sure that the colored side, sometimes they're clear, but whatever that curved part is on top and not the bottom. So now when I lay it on my sewing machine, this is flat and this is flat against the sewing bed. So now we're going to sew this as well with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Don't forget to backstitch at the start and the stop. So I'm going to cut this little extra piece or that I have here that was too long. I'm just going to cut that off. All right. The next thing we're going to do, and I'll stay right here with the sewing machine, is I'm going to top stitch along the bottom here. So you can top stitch. I'm going to top stitch it on the exterior fabric. You can top stitch on the exterior and the bottom, waterproof. I'm just going to do it along the exterior. I'm trying to push this piece up, but if you don't get it, that's fine. But you want to push that up towards that seam, up towards the side gusset piece. When I top stitch, I'm using 1/8 of an inch. And the reason that I do this is because I want to lock down that piece or that seam. I want to try to lock it down. So it's very small, but you can do it. I'm going to leave my stitch length, even though it's a top stitch, I'm leaving it at the 3, just because I want it to be, really tight in there. But you can up it to a 4 or 4.5 like you did for this side piece here. And this is pretty easy because the 1/8 of an inch, you're just following that seam. And I'm just going to flip this around so you can see it right there. And I'm just trying to lock this in the up position. And then I'm going to flip around to the other side, and I'm going to do the same thing. Hopefully you guys can see this. It's kind of, I'm trying to look at the camera and it looks kind of bright. So it may be too bright. But if you can't see it and you think it's too bright, let me know and I will adjust the lighting here. So once again, we're pushing the seam in the up position and we're stitching it at 1/8 of an inch. And I'm just trying to lock that down. So my son is changing positions, which is, I think, affecting the lighting on that side. So let's get. I'm just changing my sewing machine lighting because the sun is going down over here. So hopefully that's a lot better. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've done with the gusset. So this is what your gusset should look like when you're done. You should have that center piece in the middle, and then you should have these 2 pieces attached. At the bottom, you should have your marks that I asked you to place, and we're going to use those marks for the side when we attach the side. Okay, and Jillian said that her machine does stop with it, but it typically stops in the corner. So I guess I don't know if it's a tweaking of the needle position. I don't think so. I think it's just a matter that you have to make sure that even though it stops, that rotated just a little bit your hand crank in the same direction that it's going in. So it's usually towards you, and make sure it's going back in the up position before. So some of them are perfect, some of them are not. I think the whole purpose of a needle positioner is just to get the needle down, not to make sure it's going on the up. So maybe that's what it is. Okay, so I know some of you who are on here going, needle positioner, what's that? It's an industrial, semi-industrial machine kind of thing that really helps with sewing. So now we're going to take this piece, but before we take our gusset piece, we're going to need to take our front piece, and we're going to need to install. So this is my front piece. I know the front, yours may be, um, exactly the same. So find which one you like better, position it with your flap and see which one. I know this is the front because when I cut it, I made sure that I had that border piece on the bottom, and that would mark for me my back because I wanted to get a piece of the little logo there. So this is my front. I'm going to fold this in half to mark the center. So the way I mark the center is I fold it in half, and then I do about a 1/8 of an inch snip. You can see where it is because the foam is 1/4 of an inch down. So somewhere between where the foam is and the edge, cut an angular snip. And then I'm going to do the same at the bottom. And I cut a 1/4 of an eighth. I'm sorry, 1/8 of an inch little snip. And it just makes a little triangle. I don't do it on the side because I don't worry about the sides as much, but I'll try to show you. It's right here where my finger is. That's a 1/8 of an inch, and you can see it's right above the foam. And I did that on the top and the bottom. Although I didn't get the bottom so well, but I did it at the top and the bottom, I promise you. The other thing you can do is if you want with a marking tool, you can mark the bottom center. So you can take a marking tool and you can just draw a line for your center if that's easier for you and you're not comfortable with snipping into your fabric. All right. So what we want is we want our lock. So we're going to install the lock. I'm only going to install right now the bottom piece of the lock, not the top piece. So this is actually two pieces, right? So this is the bottom piece and this is the top piece. I'm going to install this piece first, and then this piece I will install at the end. And once again, I don't want to scratch up my hardware. So any hardware that you can leave till the end when your bag is done, you should do that. There is protective plastic that you can purchase to cover your hardware. It's sort of like saran wrap, but a little bit thicker, to cover your hardware to help keep it protected while you're using it. Okay. So I'm going to need to, on this one, I'm going to need to bend these prongs up. So I'm going to grab my screwdriver. And I'm just going to bend these up. You'll buy hardware normally that has the prongs already in the up position, and the plate that I'm going to show you in a second, it comes separately in the bag or the container that you get it in. Because these are so strong, they were attached as part of, they were folded down, but you can fold them up. Please make sure when you're using your hardware, if it has prongs, hardware is not created equally, and there is some hardware, if you bend these back and forth too many times, that piece will snap. I've seen it happen on magnetic closure pieces. So bend it as little as possible if you don't know, and because I'd hate to think that you did it and you snapped it. So now we need to find the center of this piece. So we're going to, according to the directions, I marked the center here, and I'm not going to worry about it, but I'm just going to draw a center line. So I'm just going to draw a line here, right down the center. And it's this is Frisian, which I mentioned. If you apply heat, it disappears. So I'm just going to draw a line. I really want it just near the top, but if you look at the directions, it'll tell you. So I drew a line. I then need to measure down on that line and draw another line. And the amount is in your instructions. So I'm just going to draw another line. Okay. So that's really where my lock is going to go. When I look at my bottom of my lock, and you can test it and put it back in, I'm going to see, for example, I'm going to see, and you should always align them, I'm going to see that this lock should be this way, right? Because that's the way it falls. So that's the way I want it to be installed, right? I normally clip them together and then take them apart, but that's the way I want it to be installed. So because I want it to be installed this way, my plate has to also be up and down in the same direction. Now you can put, if you would like, you can put a piece of Decoville Heavy, Decoville Light, a piece of vinyl, whatever you want to put on that, you can put on here to reinforce it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a piece of reinforcement, and I had it at my hand, and I'm going to reinforce that piece right there. Now you can, if you'd like to, you can, fuse it on there. If you've drawn on it and you don't want to fuse it on there, you don't have to. It will stay. So I'm just going to, this one is actually a peel and stick. So I'm just going to peel this and stick it right on there. I can see the mark right through this. So I can see it through here. So if you don't want to, you don't have to adhere it. It just needs to be on there. So if you're afraid that you're going to erase your marks, this you can use a permanent like pen or a pencil. I drew it first because I need to see where it is, right, to place it. If I thought it was up here, it would not be centered or placed. This one I just peeled and stuck on there. I then take my plate. My plate actually has a certain number of holes, right? So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 does not divide evenly into this so that I can draw it. So what it really has to do is I have to put that cross mark where the metal plate is. So it's on a piece of the metal plate, and I'll try to show you that also. And I'm just going to try to zoom in for you guys so you can actually see where it is on that metal plate. Okay, so where it is the metal plate right here is covering my line. So I'll put it right next to it so you can see that, right? So that piece of the metal plate, this piece is covering that line. And that's because it's not even. If it's even, then you can do that. The reason I'm doing that is because you can shift it up or down, but by doing it that way, I know that I'm guaranteed to get these in one of the holes that are there. All right, so that's really where I'm going to put the metal plate. I'm going to hold it in place just like that, and I'm going to draw a mark. So I need this piece in order to be able to align where that mark is going to go. So I can see this prong lines up with the one near the top, so that one, and this prong lines up pretty much with the one. So it's one from the top and one from the bottom, and I just draw a line in there. All right. So now what I have is I will have this mark at the top, the crosshair, which was the center, and this line at the bottom. I will need to cut these two lines, the lines that I just drew, in order for those prongs to fit through. So the way that I do that is I fold this in half, just like that. And you can use a seam ripper if you would like. I'm just going to snip it with a scissor. If you use a seam ripper, you may add a pin to the end. And I'm not a pin person, I'm just going to tell you that. So you can add a pins to the end. So if you're going to use a seam ripper, take a pin. That's so that you don't rip it too small. It's better that you rip it smaller or you cut it smaller than cut it too big. So if you take a pin with a seam ripper, you can put the pin in here just like this. So I'm just putting it in where that line is and out where that line is. Just like that. And if you're using a seam ripper, and I'll pretend that my scissor is a seam ripper. So I have a seam ripper. I can then stick the seam ripper in where the line starts. I can stick it in there, just like that. And then I can push the seam ripper. When you push it, that pin that's right here, that metal piece, will stop you from continuing on. So even if you have a sharp seam ripper, which you should, that pin will stop the seam from going further. So that's just a tip if you're using a seam ripper to cut the hole. I did find pins. See that? I have a couple of pins. Just a couple. So now we're going to fold this in half, which is what I do. And then I will snip with the point of my scissor. I'll just snip right there where that line is drawn. And then I will do the same to this side. I will just snip it. So I'm putting the point of this at the very end of that. I don't know if you can hear that, but it cuts. And then I do the same thing here. But you must fold it in half. Okay? So once you've done that, I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to push it through the back first, just because I want to make sure it goes all the way through, and it does. Okay, and it should go all the way from the back to the front, and it does. So now I'm going to turn this over and push it in from the front to the back. Make sure that you have it in the right position. We're going to double check this, that it's in the right position. It's harder to see on the front, but we're going to double check it. Okay. So it's in there. It's going to come out. Okay. So now you should see the prongs on the back, and this is the front. All right, it's not exactly centered, but it's close enough. All right, so now I just want to double check that this is positioned correctly. So I'm going to take the other piece of my lock. So nothing worse than installing the lock and then realizing it's the wrong way. And I'm just going to slide that in there, and I can see it locks in place. All right, so I just want to make sure that it locks correctly. And it's an upside down view for this particular piece of hardware. Now what you can do is, if you want to, you can stick another piece of Decovil light or vinyl or whatever scrap that you have over this again. And it slipped out. The other thing I will mention to you is that if you want, you can add some fray check also. So this is fray check. There's other brands and they're called something else check. But you can add this to your fabric where you have your slits. And the purpose of it is to stop it from fraying at that part where you cut it. So you can put it anywhere that there's a cut. If you wanted to put it up here, if you wanted to put it around the sides, any place that there's a slit, you can add that piece. So let's put this back in again. It should get easier every time I put it in and out, right? You would think. But it's not. So once we do this, we're going to add this piece back onto it. So this actually has I'll just mention it. It's actually a rough side or a sharp side where they punch the metal in a smooth side. I put the sharp side down. I don't put it up because I don't want it to scratch the inside of the bag. And I'm going to adjust the prongs just so they fit in those two holes where I thought they should fit. So it was next to last holes. I'm going to push this down. Actually, I think it's more of the other holes now that I've put it on. I think it's more the top holes than the bottom holes. But at least you have some play in here. Okay. So you're going to put that on there. And then what you're going to do is you're going to bend these down. I use a screwdriver. You can use, whatever is easier for you. What I do say to you is that when you're bending them down, don't bend from the top. Push it from the bottom. So you want to push as much as you can from the bottom of the piece, not from the top. And that's because you want to get this as flat as possible. If you push from up here, sometimes it will create a little bubble at the bottom. So I try to push from the bottom just to get it as flat as possible first and then push it down. If you need to, you can hammer it. So you can grab a hammer if you're finding that that bubble is not, is annoying you and it's sticking up a little bit. You can grab a hammer and hammer it. What I would say is that you should put something at the bottom because it is your hardware to protect your hardware. So put a piece of foam or a couple layers of foam or fleece just to be able to hammer this flat if you need to, and to protect your hardware. So now we've installed this piece. The other piece I mentioned before we will install at the very end so that we don't knock it around so much. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we want to attach this piece, and okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to attach, sorry, the gusset piece that we've created. We want to attach it around our piece. And I just want to zoom in. Hopefully you can see. Okay. So we want to attach this around this side. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to fold this gusset piece in half, just like this. And it's all about marking the centers. I'm going to take a snip and once again mark the center here. You can use, like I mentioned before, if you want to use a pen, you can mark it just like this. Okay, but I snip everything. So about 1/8 of an inch snip. Okay. We have a snip at the bottom of our front as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first match this piece here with the bottom center. So with that line there, I'm going to match the snip. I'm then going to clip this in place. And then what I will do is I marked, and it's not on this piece, but yesterday I had you mark, I had you take your piece, your corner piece, which is this. On the pattern piece, when you printed out, there was a fold. So I had you fold it like this. And then I had you mark a little line here. And I told you you're going to need it later. So that's what I had you do. I'm then going to take that line and the line that I drew earlier today, and I'm going to match them up because that's going to be my curve. And this we're going to play around with a little bit. And then we're going to take the top and we're going to match the top. So that you clip in 3 places. Once again, I'm putting my clips in a way that I'm going to lay my piece down like this. So I'm making sure the bottom of the clips are facing down, the flat side. Then what you're going to do is you're going to clip along the side. So I'm just clipping along the side till I get back to that corner. All right. And clip as much as you need. All right. Don't be shy with the clips. If you want to clip more, clip more. I am not cutting anything. I'm just clipping. There is not a deep curve on this corner, so it should be easy to clip. You shouldn't have to cut anything. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then take our bottom piece and we're going to clip that as well. What I will mention to you is that seam here that we sewed down. If you have to make an adjustment, just push the seam in and it should be totally fine and it should lie flat. All right, so then you have this piece like this. So when I sew it, I'm going to show you this, but when I sew it and it comes to the corner, I'm going to bend this to make a peak like this, and then I'm going to flatten it like this, which will help me get around that curve. And I'll mention it when I get back to the sewing machine, but I just wanted to show you on camera. So I'm just going to readjust this just a tad to make sure that I get both pieces of fabric. Now what's nice is that your foam, because of it's cut shorter by 1/4 of an inch, which is your seam allowance, you should be able to follow the edge of the foam use the edge of the foam as your guide when you're sewing around this curve, because we are using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so let's do the same with the other side. So like I mentioned yesterday, you should have gotten your piece. You should have folded it in half like this. You should have then used this mark that you've created on the fold. That becomes your guide to match this up with. So we're going to match those two together just like that. We're going to clip them in place. I've already done the center, so I don't have to do that. And then I'm going to match the top. So once you have those three, the center, that mark that I told you to make, and the top clipped together, we can then go in and clip the sides. And just take your time. I know that this is different. I said this yesterday. I know we haven't done curves, so it may be a little bit different, but it is something that you can manage and you can handle. And it's also a good skill to have because not all bags are straight pieces. But at least if you give it a try, if you don't like it, you can go back to, keeping the straight pieces and you won't have to worry. Most patterns will also tell you how the curve works, and how to get it to fit. Some patterns will have you snip this and fit it in so it's more snug. I didn't want to do that because I don't want to confuse you if this is the first time that you're doing a bag with a curve. So this is the easiest way to introduce it to you in such a way that you can be successful. And over time, as you improve your skills, you'll start to do something a little bit different, like clipping it and pulling it. It's exactly measured, so you shouldn't have that much to do. So I'm just making sure that I have my foam pulled in such a way. That's what I'm doing. All right. So when you're done, that's what it should look like. Right? There shouldn't be, it should be totally clipped in place. As I mentioned before, add as many clips as you need to add to get it, to hold it for you. If you find that you need 32 clips, that's okay. Use 32 clips. And then take your time sewing. So we're going to take this to the machine and we are going to sew around this curve. And we're going to take our time we get to the curve just so that you can see how it's done. If you need to hand crank it, then you can hand crank it. But let's take it to the sewing machine so we can see. So we're going to have a stitch length of 3. And it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that, once again, will be the edge of our presser foot. So I'm going to drop my presser foot just to hold it down before I take out that clip. And take your time on this. So we're going to start going forward. We're going to back stitch. We're going to go forward again. I'm just removing my clips as I come to them. You should not need to necessarily lift it, remove it. If you push down on the clip right here and pull, it will come off. So I'll show you when I come to that clip. So now I'm here. I'm just going to push down and I'm pulling to the side. All right. If you need to use 2 fingers, you can, but over time you'll get it and it shouldn't be that difficult. So now I'm coming to that curve, right? So if your piece is sitting up like this, you want to get it out of the way. The easiest way to get this curve out of the way is to just flatten it, right? So we're just going to flatten this against the fabric. So we just fold it where it naturally folds and then push it down and it's flattened. So now I can see my curve where I need to go around. I'm going to remove my clips. You can remove them as you come to them. I'm then going to slowly sew around that curve. If you have to, you can hand crank. So I can lift the needle, lower the needle, rotate it a little bit, lift the needle, lower the needle, if that's easier for you to do. The other thing you can do on the curve is you can reduce your stitch length if you want to get because it's easier. But if the needle's down, you could just lift it and turn it, drop it, and then sew some more. So whatever way is easier for you, those are just some options that you can use. And I'm just going to make sure that this lines up. And just so you know, it's very forgiving, that 1/4 inch, believe it or not. So I'm just going to make sure that I sew it. And yes, I do take my time over the thicker parts. I really hate breaking needles and having to change a needle, so I take my time over the thicker parts. This foam should be pretty pliable, so it should flatten very nicely. And coming to the other corner, remember I said we're going to flatten the material. So we're going to take this, I'm just going to bend it, and I'm going to flatten it so that I can get around that curve. And take your time. And you'll be surprised that you may think it's messy, and then you turn it to the front and the curve is perfect. And like I mentioned, your foam is your guide of your 1/4 inch, because it should be a 1/4 inch away from the edge. And I'm going to back stitch at the start and the stop. Okay? Cut your thread. And we should be done. So what we're going to do is we're just going to check. And we're just going to check to make sure that we have all of our seams caught in there. So I will take a look at the back first, make sure that I have all the seams. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it right side out. And then I'm going to just double check that I have all of my seams. Like that I don't have any holes over here on the sides or any place, and I caught everything. I will mention that if you take a look at the bottom, this piece and this piece look like it should be about the same. If you look at it and it's like off by like 3/18 of an inch, don't stress yourself. The sides here should not have any foam in it, so it made it very easy to sew through. And this is going to be the front. We're going to repeat the same for the back, but before we attach the back, we need to create our flap, because we haven't done that. So I try to put all the pieces together first before we start attaching it. So I'm going to turn this back inside out, and I will be setting this to the side. So the next thing you want to get is your back, and you want to get your flap. Remember, each of these, just like the front, only have a curve on the bottom. I'm going to take my flap piece, and it should be smaller first, and I'm going to take the back piece of the flap. So you should have cut out of your waterproof canvas a piece for your flap. So I'm not worrying about the lock, because the lock gets slid on afterwards. I'm just going to attach these two together. So I'm going to put them right sides together. So if you lay this the right side up, and you take your waterproof canvas and you lay that wrong side up, so they're right sides together now. And the right side is a side that has the fabric on it, and the wrong side is the part that looks like it's plastic. I'm going to align the edges, and I'm going to clip this in place all the way around. Now I will be sewing this with the waterproof canvas side towards the sewing machine, just so that you can see my foam and you can see the seam allowance. Normally I would sew it the other way because this is smoother, but it's about the same. So I just want you to see the foam, and it's easier to see on the foam side. Okay, so those are clipped together. We're going to sew down the side, around the bottom, across the bottom, back up the other side. You will leave this top completely open, so do not sew that top piece closed. We're going to use the top to turn it right side out, and then we're going, when we attach this to our back, the opening will get sealed in. So you'll see how that happens when we get to that part. But for right now, we're just sewing 3 sides, left, right, and the bottom, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Back stitches are starting to stop. Take your time around the corners. Sew across the bottom. Now what I do, and I don't know if you saw me do it, but what I do is I rotate the fabric as I'm going around very slowly. I rotate the fabric. So I rotate this piece here, I just turn it like this as I go around very slowly the curves. And then we're backstitch at the end of it. So we're going to cut out the red with our presser foot. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to turn this right side out. So let's turn this right side out so that you can see how it looks. So I'm just going to take this. I started a corner, so I put my hand into the top, go to a corner and just poke that corner in. It just makes it easier. And you can grab it with your hand, and then I fold it out. And you want to get that as flat as possible, so poke those corners out. If you need to, I put it against my body, that's why I went off camera, but if you need to, you can press it, you can roll it. You can even use the little screwdriver that came in the kit. You can use that and put it in there and push it out a little bit. Just be very careful that you don't poke a hole in the bottom. I just flatten it a little bit, but you can see it has that nice gentle curve in it. I do the same to the other side. And what I also want to do is check that I didn't skip anything. The other thing you can do is, I know that you can take something like a chopstick, something with a blunt edge, and you can roll it in there. If you have a knitting needle or a crochet hook, the top of those you can use to do that as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten this as flat as I can get it. I didn't trim any of the seams because you shouldn't really need to. Sometimes they will have you trim corners or the sides. You shouldn't have to do that with this bag. It should fall nicely, and you should not see the waterproof canvas on the back. So that's how it will look. The next thing we're going to do is we will be top stitching around the entire this entire piece. I am also going to top stitch this close, only because it'll make it easier when we're attaching it, so that I don't forget any of the pieces or they remain unsewn. So I will top stitch around the entire thing. You can just do the 3 sides if you want to, but I top stitch the entire thing because this is going to get hidden. I'm adding clips just to help to keep it flat, but you do not have to. And I will be top stitching it from the fabric side, not from the lining side. Okay, so I will be top stitching from this side, not from this side. If you want to, you can switch out your bobbin and make your bobbin the same color as the lining. I am not. I'm just going to use the purple thread that I'm using for the top, and that'll be the same as what's on the bottom. So let's top stitch this. Remember, your top stitching is at a stitch length of 4. So change your stitch length because we've been using 3. I'm going to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch. If you're not comfortable with 1/8 of an inch, you can top stitch at 1/4 of an inch. So do what's comfortable for you. I will be doing 1/8 of an inch. For me, that's the inside right here, inside edge of my presser foot. If you're doing 1/4 of an inch, it should be, I believe, the outside edge. Take your time around the curves, and I'm going to take some shorter stitches around there just to show you how it's done. So I'm going to stitch down this side. I'm back stitching, and I'm going to go forward. Take your time with your top stitching, and like I mentioned, try to keep going. Don't stop if you go a little bit off. So now as I get to that curve, it may get tricky. So what you can do is turn your stitch length down to a 2 or a 3. And then you can slowly, I turned mine down to a 3 if anybody wants to do what I'm doing. I slowly take one stitch at a time and I rotate. One stitch, rotate. One stitch, rotate. So there's nothing wrong with this, right? There's nothing wrong with taking your time around this and slowing down as you become more comfortable with this. When I get back to the straightaway, I turn it back up to a 4 until I get to the other side. And just because I want to make it even, I'm going to turn my stitch length back down to a 3 for my corner. Take my time, one stitch at a time, rotate a little bit. When you get back to the straightaway, in other words, the piece becomes totally straight. Right there, turn it back up to a 4, and then you're going to stitch to the end. As I mentioned before, I am going to sew across the top. So I'm going to lift my presser foot and pivot because there's no curve or easy way to do it. And I'm going to stitch at the top using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance because I just want to seal it closed. I have had instances where I don't close something or stitch it together, even if it's just temporary, and one piece or the other got left out of the seam when I was sewing it. So I've just gotten into the habit where I just sew any open seams so I don't have to worry about leaving anything behind. Okay. So that should be done. This is your top stitching that you did. Okay, so this is the top stitching that you did going down the side. And hopefully you can see that. When I got to the corner, the stitches got smaller. So then I did smaller stitches here. And then when I got to the straightaway, I increased my stitch length again. I got to this end, they got smaller. See, they got smaller over here. And then I went to the end. Honestly, nobody's going to look at your flap and go, oh, they're smaller at the corner. So nobody's going to look at that and criticize you for it. I promise you. Okay. So I hope I have not lost anybody. Great. Okay. So now your flap is done. And the next thing we need to do with the flap is we need to attach it to our back. So just to explain to you how this will happen, we're going to lay our back right side up. We're going to install the flap so that it's upside down, or these two pieces are right side together. So the flap and this piece will be right side together. Once we stitch across the flap, we're then going to take our flap and we're going to flip it back this way. So then they'll be right sides up. And then we're going to finish off the strap. The flap. Because we're going to stitch this at 1/4 of an inch, when we flip it back over and we stitch it again as 1/4 of an inch, it will hide that raw edge. So that's what I was saying earlier, that we're going to hide the raw edge and you won't even see that the raw edge is there. I just sewed the raw edge because I do not want to see, I don't want to miss anything, because I've done it where things have gotten missed. So just double checking to make sure. What we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to put it on the back of our bag. Hi, Della. You are more than welcome. Thanks for joining me. So I'm going to use again my paper tape just to hold it in place. Make sure it's even on the left and the right. The directions are, in the directions, it tells you how far down and what you should do. I'm just going to use a little piece of paper tape right here. And I'm just going to use a little piece of paper tape here. In case I didn't mention this before, or I don't mention it enough, I do not like pins. So my fingers don't like pins. So I've taped this down. I'm now going to stitch this at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance across this flap to attach it here. Before I do that, I'm just going to double check for myself that more or less my flap looks good on the back, because I tried to align those. I tried to align, the pattern. But if you didn't, you don't have to do this. Okay, so now I know it's straight, even, good. And I'm going to go and stitch this at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Turn your stitch length down to a 3, because I left it at a 4 because I was top stitching, so I'm turning it back down to 3. You should be starting on the edge of your flap. I started a little bit before. I shouldn't have done that, but on the edge of your flap, go forward like 2 or 3 stitches, and then go backwards 2 or 3 stitches. And then just use a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to sew it on. When you get to the bottom, the other side over here, back 2 or 3 stitches, and then forward 2 or 3 stitches. Okay. So that's what it should look like. Remember, I said if you peel this off, it should rip like perforating paper. It should rip right off. So you should be able to get it off with not an issue. All right, so let's go back just so that you can see to the cutting surface. Okay, so I'm just going to peel this off. And just like this. But it should be attached. Now what I do is, because this is, I want to make sure that I don't get any of this peeking through to the other side, is I will trim down as best I can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I will trim down the seam allowance on the flap, because when you fold it over, if you don't get exactly 1/4 of an inch, this piece may stick out. So I'm going to get it as best as I can. I'm going to trim it a little bit. And I say in the directions, trim it to 1/8 of an inch, which really is trimming it in half if it's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. but don't trim it so close that you can't, um, that you create a hole. So just getting that paper tape out of there. Okay. So you take your scissor. I actually fold it like this, just like that. And I'm going to trim this in half. So I'm going to trim that in half. So let's make sure we can, I want you to see what I'm doing. So this is my seam right here. I'm just going to take my scissor and I'm going to trim it in half. If you can see that, if you did the 1/8 of an inch, like I did to sew it together, it's really just cutting along that line. So get as close as you can without getting too, without cutting your seams again, and cut that in half. Just like that. And that's just to make sure, like I said, when I fold this flap over like this, and I stitch it 1/4 of an inch, I don't want to see this peeking out of the bottom. So that's why I cut it in half. All right. So now we're going to flip it around. We're going to turn our so that it's like this. The flap is at the bottom, wrong side. I'm going to press my flap towards the top, just like this. Now, what happens is I need to attach the bag at the top, and this should lay pretty flat. Got a little off on the making this straight, but it's fine. It looks good. And what I want to do is when I sew the bag together, I need to have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance at the top over here at the edge. So I sew it together. So what I'm going to have you do is make a mark, some type of small mark, so that you know where to start and stop on your flap, so that when we have to sew it together, it does not interfere with the putting of the bag together. So we need 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to give you another 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to give you 1/2 an inch of your flap at the top. So about here is where we want to start and stop our flap. So I'm just going to take a clip for myself. You can use a marking tool, something that comes off or erases. I'm just going to put a clip right there. So I know that that's 1/2 an inch, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. Right? So what happens is the top of my clip here is the 1/2 an inch mark. So I'm going to start where the top of the clip is, go down, sew across the bottom, and sew back up to the top of that clip. You want to backstitch a couple of times, because keep in mind this flap opens and closes a couple of times to secure it. If you have a rivet and you want to use a rivet, absolutely after you stitch it, you can add a rivet there as well. But we're just going to stitch it, go backwards and forward like 2 or 3 times to backstitch to secure it. 1/4 of an inch going down, across, and back up. Right? So you should have a line that's parallel to your top stitching line on your flap on the back. So I hope that makes sense. So let's go back to the sewing machine and sew this up. This is not going to be a top stitch. It's going to be a regular stitch. I'm not top stitching. What I'm actually doing is securing the flap to the back. So I'm starting right where this clip is. At the edge of my flap, I'm going to stitch down 4 stitches. I'm counting back 4 stitches, going back down 4 stitches. Okay, so I reinforced it like twice. Come down to the bottom of the flap here. So when you get to within 1/4 of an inch of the bottom, you're going to stop. This was Jillian's question. The needle is down, but what I want to do is pull my wheel towards me, and I should see this needle going back up into the upward position. Once I see it going back into the upward position, I can then lift, turn. If you do that, you should not get that carry stitch that goes like at an angle of your corner. And then I'm going to start sewing because it's already grabbed the bobbin thread underneath. So I'm going to stitch across, and I'm stitching on the flap, not on the back of the bag. When I get to this corner over here, to about 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to lift my presser foot. Once again, it's in the down position. I don't know how well I can show you this, but if I turn it towards me, it starts moving up. So I know that I'm in a good position to rotate. And then I stitch once again till I get to the top of this clip. I don't want to stitch all the way up because I still have to sew the bag together. So I'm doing it at 1/2 inch, which gives me more than enough room when I'm attaching the bag. And then I can backstitch. So I went 4 back. You can do as many as you want. I go forward. Okay, guys, I'm back. Just when you thought everything was going perfectly with the tech, I think my internet went down. So I'm just going to reconnect and then we can talk through a couple of things. I'm not sure exactly at what point it went crazy or haywire, but let's talk through what I did and then hopefully um, I'll be able to catch you guys up on what you missed. So just let me turn on some. I don't know why that happened. I just want to turn on a little bit more light here. I can figure out where the light is. So we'll get it all sorted out. But at least I'm back on. Well, I'm not on the screen, but I'll be there in a second with you guys. Just want to make sure I get my sewing machine set up and everything. And we're not doing anything crazy. All right, so I honestly couldn't see when it went out. I just know that when I came back to look at my laptop, it was out. So one more second. And I hope I still have the sound, which is always the other thing that goes haywire normally. And yep. Okay. So hopefully, I'm back on. Hopefully, everybody can see me. I'll catch you up because I'm not really sure at what point it went out. So I'll catch you up on what I did so that you can see what you don't feel like you miss anything. So what I did, and I think I was still good when I talked about measuring down over here. Thank you so much, Della. Um, so I had you sew down here and then sew around. So that's all I did. I had a clip sitting right here at a half an inch on this side and an inch, a half an inch on the other side over here. And that was my start. So the top of my clip told me where I start stitching. When I went to the sewing machine, I used a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and I used a stitch length of 3 and not a top stitch because I want to lock it in, which is why I didn't use the top stitch. And then I stitched down. When I got to a 1/4 of an inch, I turned the corner and I went across the bottom. And then I stopped there as well, 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and I sewed back up to the top and stopped at the top of my clip on either side. So when you do that and you turn your piece over, you should have an L shape, which was the shape that we made by attaching the flap. So you should see a little L shape, a U shape back here. And one thing I did, I purposely made the flap a little bit longer so that the flap would fold over. But I also wanted to create a little pocket back here. So if you are like me and you're ever losing a chapstick or a pen, I can always keep a pen here. And it's just a little tiny, it's a shallow pocket back here. It may not be big enough for a cell phone, but it is big enough for like a pen or a chapstick. So that's how we attach the flap. So now what we need to do is take the back piece. So that, I mean, the front piece that we put together earlier, and we need to attach that piece to our actual um, back that we created. We're going to do it exactly the same way we did to attach it. We're going to do it exactly the same way we did before. And we need to align our center marks first. So I'm going to start at the bottom here, and I'm going to align my center mark by putting a clip here. I'm then going to take my mark that I put right here on my back piece, and that was based on the folding and of our corner piece to make the curve, and I'm going to align it with my other mark that's here on the side. So we did that when we put together the gusset. I'm then going to clip the top edges, and your flap should be sticking up. And if you did this correctly according to the directions, the flap should be out of the way of your seam allowance. So you shouldn't by sticking it up, it should be out of the way of your seam allowance. So you don't have to worry about catching it. And then we're going to put another clip. Make sure to, and you can pull your fabric in such a way that it, it smooths out and you catch it. So when I'm attaching this, I should have right sides together, right? So it's right sides together that I'm attaching. I've done this one side. I'm going to attach the bottom. So I'm going to do the bottom as well. So I did the corner. I'm going to do the bottom. And make sure your clips, I'm turning my clips around because they're not facing in the direction for me to sew. So I clip the bottom. I'm going to go to this other corner here. I'm going to look for my mark, and I'm going to match the marks up. And I'm going to put a clip. I then take the top and I clip that next. And then I start clipping the other pieces together. So then I start clipping down the side once I have those matching. So those are key points that need to be matched. So now I'm going to match the sides. I will be sewing from the top of my bag this way. So my clips are facing up and the flat sides on the bottom. So that's what I was flipping around earlier. And so we're going to do this. I may have to fill up my little clip jar here. I've stepped on so many, it's half as full. So and now I did the curve. I'm going to clip the bottom. I'm going to make sure I have the whole curve. So I'm just going to pull my fabric out and, match it. Once again, your foam, where your foam is in your bag, tells you exactly where your 1/4 inch mark is. All right. And then once we've done that, I'm going to go to the sewing machine. Hopefully, I won't lose you guys when I go to the sewing machine. But when I sew this, I'm going to push down and bend this in, right? So when I get to the curve, I'm going to bend these pieces in, but I can see where I'm going. Since this is the bulk of the bag, I want to keep this facing up so that the back, which has less bulk, is facing down. It also makes it easier to go around those curves. So let's go to the sewing machine. And sew this. So hopefully you guys can still hear me. I'm just going to make sure that my audio is set. You guys should still hear me okay. Okay. So your stitch length should be at 3. Once again, the bulk of the bag is at the top. So it's at the top here. And I'm going to sew around the bag starting at one end. Take your time going around those curves. Just moving some of these cords out of the way. Take your time going around some of those curves. Or that actual curve at the bottom. Got to rethread my needle, so bear with me a little bit. It's always when you're in the home stretch of something that you have the most amount of difficulty with things. Nothing seems to go right. At least I have bobbin thread. I hope I actually filled up my bobbin thread, so I hope I don't have any issues with that. And I need a timer to see how long it takes me to thread this needle. Oh. I know you all are cracking up going, is she going to get it? The suspense is killing you. It's killing me too. Ta-da! Okay. Yes. So the needle threader that comes with this is on back order. I don't know why. And I looked for it, and all the ones that I see are not for this particular machine. And I've called and said, can I use it? And they said, oh, no, that's a different one. So I may just have to go back and get me an old-fashioned one, the little metal ones, and do that. Okay. So we are back in business. Hopefully I didn't pull that thread out. So I'm going to sew this around, like I said, at 1/4 inch. I'm using my 3-inch, 3 stitch length of 3 on my sewing machine. And take your time, once again, around those curves. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the stop. And I'm going to take my time. My 1/4 inch, as I mentioned before, is the edge of my presser foot over here. So that's my 1/4 inch. I'm just, if you see my bag, I'm folding my bag in only because I have some cables over here for the camera. And I don't want it to get caught and yank the camera. So that's why you see that. And you want to make sure you get both pieces of fabric. So please take your time. We can always come back and grab it later, but who wants to do that, right? Once again, you can shorten the stitch length for around the corner if that's what you want to do and it makes it easier for you. I do fold this piece down, and I find when I fold this piece down here, it actually helps to poke the corner out. So I'm going to sew around that corner. Take your time around the corner. If this is your first time sewing corners, take your time. It's not a race. Shorten the stitch length if you need to. And thanks for telling me, Della, also that you can hear me. That helps a lot. So I'm keeping an eye on the camera to see if my internet goes out again. All right. For those of you who think I zip through this, I don't. I take my time around the corners also. I don't zip through it. Okay, we're almost there. Okay. So now I've sewn that all the way around. I'm just going to double check my seams before I go. Okay. And make sure. So now that we have that all done, let's take a look at how it looks. So, all right. So this is how your bag should look at this point, right? Because we've sewn everything all the way around, all the sides. We should have our lock installed, the first part of our lock installed. And pretty much this is how it should look. Just getting okay. So that's how it should look. So now I'm going to turn this right side out and cut some of these threads. Turn this right side out. Check that you've gotten, you don't have any gaps, and especially in the corner where you turned. Make sure you got the entire corner. Check your seams on the side and the back. So I'm just checking those and pushing everything out. We will be turning this back around again, but just double check, cut your little threads. Okay, and now that's how your bag should look. So you have your side gusset piece in, it goes down to your bottom accent piece, and then it goes back up the side. Your flap is attached, right? So we attach the flap. You should have that. When we close the flap, this is my center, we will be attaching the other part of the flap afterwards, and it will sit right in there. It'll sit right in that piece. And that's once we do the lining tomorrow. So the one thing that I'm going to do today with you as well is I'm going to attach the hardware for the pieces of the strap so that we can prepare that as well for tomorrow. So your exterior should now be complete. Everything that you needed to sew is now complete on your exterior. Let's do the strap, which should be the last um, thing that we need to do in preparation for tomorrow, which is the lining and putting it all together. So you're going to I grabbed a piece of foam because I'm going to need to rest my hardware on here. You're going to need your strap piece, and this is the main strap piece, and then you're going to need the piece that is for the bottom, and I think I call this the slider strap piece in the directions or in the instructions. So I grabbed a piece of foam or something soft so that when I screw things in, I don't scratch it. Thank you so much, Della. Yes, an old school needle threader. That's exactly what I need. I keep seeing them, so I'm going to definitely pick it up. All right, so now we have our strap, and we're going to install. The first thing we're going to do is let's install the hinge connectors. It doesn't really matter the order, honestly, but I'm going to install the hinge connectors. Now there should be two of them, and they both have screws, right? So they have two sets of screws. One set of screws is at the top, and these are smaller screws, and then we have bigger ones at the bottom. The smallest screws are the ones that we're going to be unscrewing, and those are the ones where we're going to put our strap through. So we're going to put one hinge connector on one part of the strap, which is a longer strap, and one hinge connector on the shorter strap piece. So that's what we're going to do. Oh, a needle threader. Yeah. I think that between the needle threader in your box and the lint roller is the other thing. I haven't used it in 2 days, so it's getting kind of lonely. I have it hanging out over here, but that's so funny. So I'm unscrewing the little screws here on the hinge connector, so they're the smaller ones. And I'm just going to take my main strap first. I'm going to cut off some of these threads. And we're only going to install this on one. All right. So one thing I want to mention is when you sewed this together, there was a side that had a seam that the two pieces met, and then there's the other side that it was the curved edge or where it wasn't. Take a look. If it matters to you, take a look and make sure when you install the hinge connector, you're installing it on the same side. Because when you do it on this piece as well, you want to make sure that you install it on the same side, right? So I'm going to install this on the round side. So I'm going to make sure it's my round side that I'm installing my hinge connector on. So when I hold it like this, it's the round side. And this is the same thing when I hold it like this. So these are two round sides. The opening is on the back side. So that's just something to keep in mind if you ever use these and you're not using this particular fabric. So all I did was I took the hinge connector. There's a slit right here. I pushed in the fabric strap until it couldn't go anymore. Now, I use something called Loctite or thread tight. There's so many different names for it. It's totally up to you. It is optional. You can use, people have asked me, yes, you can use beacon glue. Yes, you can use crazy glue. I do not put it in the hole. What I do is I put it on a piece of tissue and then I put my screws on it. So this is my tissue right here. I will take my screws, I will put them on the tissue. And this creates like a rubberized coating to help keep it in there if it stays. And it creates a rubberized coating. I find that if you use crazy glue, it's harder to get the screws back out. So I personally wouldn't recommend it, but if that's what you want to do, but I know some people repurpose, because if they make a bag for themselves, they may want to repurpose the hardware. And if you use crazy glue, it's hard to get it out. This is more rubberized, so even though it keeps it locked in there, it's easier to get out. So I just put some of this on the screws themselves. That's how I use it. In your kit, you would have gotten a screwdriver. So you just take that little screwdriver that you got. This will make your fingers blue. Use your screwdriver. I hold it with my fingernail. I put my screw in to the small hole, and then I just screw down. And I screw down until it stops. So I get it as tight as I can get it, and it should be totally flush on the back. So this Loctite actually gets into the grooves of the screw. And I screw it down. So now when it's in there, you can see it's totally flush. When you pull your strap, it doesn't come out. All right, because I screwed it down and what happens with the screw, I'll see if I can show it here to you here. If I can, this is probably another side. In here, the screw actually goes from this end all the way to the other end. So it's the full length. So it becomes like a post in there, which is how it stays in. So I don't know if you can see that because this is dark, but that's what it does. So now this, because I put it in when I put it on the bag, my round edge here, smooth edge, is going to be what's facing up. So I want to make sure on this side also it's the rounded edge, not the edge that was open. I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to unscrew those screws. The other side with the big screws is the part we're going to put on the bag. So we're going to do that tomorrow after we've put the bag together. Now we will have to punch holes. Those of you who received the kit should have gotten a hole punch. So if you don't have one, you will need to, if you buy the pattern, you didn't get the kit, you may not know what I'm talking about tomorrow, but I will explain it to you. And it's just a hole punch. So if you have any kind of hole punch, and the one that I sent is specifically for leather, but it actually works very well with cotton, especially if there's foam involved. So you can use it for that as well. So I'm just going to put this on. I'm going to put this piece on. So when I put this piece like this, I want that piece facing up, which means that my hinge has to be this way. Okay. You push it until it stops. So it'll stop when it gets to the bottom piece here and it can't go anymore. You then take your screw, and I'm just going to stick that in that hole. Just put it back in where it came from. Make sure it's flush. If you find that you can't screw it and it doesn't seem to go, I would say to you, do not keep trying to force it. It probably means that it's threaded incorrectly. So take the screw back out and then we put it back in. If you keep turning it and it's not going down, the only thing you're going to do is strip the screw end and make the screw unusable. So you don't want to do that. Sometimes when you go to put it in, it's misaligned. So you want to make sure that it is aligned. Check it, make sure it's smooth. Okay, so now that's my 2 hinges that were added to my screw, my straps. And like I said, I put the foam down because I don't want my pieces to get scratched in any way. And this, by the way, I posted to the group, but it's called Thread Locker Blue. And I'll hold it up. I don't know if you can see it. Thread Locker Blue, and that's the one that I use. But then you can use Beacon Blue. I would advise you do what I did by putting a little bit on a tissue and then putting a drop of it on there so you don't end up messing up your holes. So the next thing we're going to do, and I should have mentioned this, the finished end here should be facing out and the unfinished end is the one that I put in there. I should have mentioned that and I apologize. I just did that and yeah, okay, that's right. The next thing we're going to do before we move on is we're going to add to this other unfinished edge of our big strap, we're going to add this particular piece, which is the strap end. And I'll show you on the regular bag what we're doing. We're creating a faux adjustable strap. So what we did is we added the hinge connector. This is the shorter strap. This is the longer strap. And on the end of the longer strap, we have that strap end. And that's to make it look like it's an adjustable strap, but I didn't want to leave a raw end. And I also didn't want to leave an end that was like maybe fabric. So I was trying to make it look a little snazzier than that. So this is the same thing. We have these small screws. We're just going to take them out. And I'm going to get my Loctite again. And I'm going to put my screws on my Loctite. Oops. My screws on my tissue. I apologize. My screws on my tissue. It won't go. It's like it's being defiant. Okay, we'll get it there. There we go. What I normally do is I put them on a piece of lint roll. This. So just make sure when you're slipping it on, look at your ends, make sure this is straight, and you want to slip this on so that the wrong sides are facing in the same direction, right? So the screw side, screw side. So this way they're facing in the same direction. You don't want this to be in there upside, want to be upside down, want to be right side up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my screws back in here. Like the other pieces, if when you push it in, it'll get pushed in and it'll stop when it gets to the end. I'm going to screw this all the way down. Just like that. Get your other screw. And if you're using this, just be careful because it is blue. So wipe your fingers off. That's what I just did. I wiped my fingers off on the tissue over there. Okay. So now we have both of these done. So these are the strap ends for our main strap, right? One is a strap end, one is a hinge connector. And then on the other side, we have the actual hinge connector. And then there's a finished edge. So the last piece we need to do, the last piece we need to do is we need to put on our slider. This is our slider. And like I said, it is in the kit. So you will need this. All right. And the way that I put on the slider, and I'll just put it onto this piece because tomorrow we'll attach them separately. And then we'll do the slider piece, is I'm going to take this right side up, take the piece with the finished edge. I'm going to put it up through one hole and down through the other hole, just like that. So now it looks like a buckle. You should be able to see it looks like a buckle. I'm then going to take this edge and I'm going to fold it down. So I tell you to pull it out maybe like 3 inches or so, because I want to make sure that you clear the hardware, right? So you can see it's clear of the hardware, because we're going to do 2 rows of stitches here to secure it. In order to do that, and the reason I tell you to make sure it's clear, you can see it's clear, is because we're going to need to flip this over out of the way. So when we sew under the bed, we actually are not sewing this. What I have done in the past is I have done this, right? I have aligned it to my 1/4 of an inch because I'm going to sew 1 row of stitches 1/4 of an inch and 1 row of stitches 1/8 of an inch. And I've used the edge as a guide. So that's something else you can do if you would like to use it as a guide. Okay. Fold it under. It's going to be with the buckle up and the piece that you're sewing on so you could see it. I advise you not to sew it from this side because you can't see if you're catching the back. We're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to put 2 rows of stitches, 1 at 1/4 of an inch and 1 at 1/8 of an inch. So hopefully you can see that. Make sure your stitch length is at a 3. If you're afraid that it won't get over if you're afraid that it won't get over the thickness of it, put it at a 3.5 so you're taking a longer stitch. But a 3 should be good. So I'll show you what I was talking about. When you see it, you'll understand. I turned the buckle up. So your buckle should be up on here, on top. If you lift the presser foot, remember I said that edge is a 1/4 inch. So if you pull this out, you can use the edge of your buckle here as your 1/4 inch guide, right? Because if I put this down, this is a 1/4 inch, and I can use the edge as my guide. I give you directions about how much to pull out and the way to do it in the instructions, but this is just a little tip. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my buckle, make sure it's out of the way. I'm going to stitch forward, stitch backward, because you want to make sure you lock it. I do go over this way at least 1 stitch, because then it creates this wrap stitch on the edge, and then I go forward again. And that's at a 1/4 inch. Take your time because it's thick, and we don't want to break a needle. Cut your thread. You're then going to go and you're going to do a 1/4 inch, I'm sorry, 1/8 inch stitch. So we're going to get the edge of this here, and we're going to stitch across at an 1/8 inch. Once again, we're going to go forward, we're going to go backward, and then we're going to go forward again at 1/8 inch. So lock that down. And I back stitch, and we're going to cut out threads. So once you've done that on the front, and I'm just clipping my threads, that's all I'm doing here. It's not the prettiest, but you won't see it. Okay, I'm just clipping my threads. But you should have 2 rows of stitches here, and your slide bar should be attached, your slider. Okay. So this is what it's going to look like for your slider once it's on. We're going to use this tomorrow when we attach the bag, and we're going to use this. So this is your strap. Tomorrow, we will be putting this in here and coming out the other side. It is going to be a little bit of a challenge. If you have difficulty doing what we do tomorrow, take off this, but we should be able to get this in here and down the other side. All right, so we have those 2, and we have our exterior of our bag completed. So these are all the pieces that we're going to need at the end of the day tomorrow when we put the bag together. That's it, guys. Hopefully you had as much fun and it was as interesting for you as it was for me. As you can see, technology is not always my friend, but we just work with it, we stick with it, and eventually it comes back around. We beat it into submission. If you've been here the last 2 days and you've been sewing along, you've done a great job. If you're just coming in, go back to, like I mentioned, go back to the first video, which was prepping. Then you watch this part, which is the exterior of the bag. And then the part 3 will be, like I said, tomorrow, which is the lining. For anybody who's interested, I also have a video on how to make this necklace, this beaded necklace. So you can look for that as well on my YouTube channel. I will put in all the links to all the material that I use and the sources for all the material that I used. If you're interested in purchasing the pattern, the fabric, the waterproof canvas, the hardware, I'll include that all in the show notes. Thank you guys so much and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.